My name is Kago Petso. I've been invited this morning to present to you, or rather, have a conversation with you around the topic on the impact or the influence as retirement fund trustees you have or you hold in enabling better member retirement outcomes. Just to lead the conversation, I intend to cover aspects around what the current outcomes at retirement look like. What the current outcomes at retirement look like, and put emphasis on the sort of retirement saving vehicles that are being utilized. Just to touch on the basics. We will also reflect on what the trustees' duties and responsibilities are, and come to appreciate what the ideal objective is at retirement. It will also be worthwhile to compare this with actual life outcomes and reiterate on the power of influence as a board of trustees you hold. So, touching on the landscape, it's quite apparent as you go and experience with some of your family members, some of your post-retired colleagues, colleagues who've retired, that their retirement outcomes are not being achieved. Their expectations are falling short. Just as illustrated, this is compounded by inflationary pressures and unsettled debt. Quite often than not, by the time we retire, a number of us have not been able to rid of some large liabilities in our balance sheets. That is quite a concern. It puts pressure on the little income that is there to provide for you in your later lives. Longevity is putting pressure on members' income replacement ratios. So they are living longer, and it means that little incomes or their incomes need to carry them further. There's also increasing health issues due to aging. Medical costs are a significant and growing challenge. Some statistics just to share with you. Between a male and a female retiree, it's projected that a male will typically have a life expectancy of about 16 years, whilst their counterpart will be around 20 years. And over the course of their life, it's expected that medical costs from their age at about 65 onwards would be almost around $1 million or even 1.2 million in the instance of it being a woman. And in reality, we find that in our environment, members are retiring earlier than age 65, in some instances at age 45. So there are other social obligations. The general sort of family life in our country, we find that retirees are retiring to also extend support to their grandchildren, which puts a burden on their incomes. Similarly, children, as they complete their studies, they're still nesting in the main family support. They're still living with their parents. And effectively, this affects the sort of lifestyle that you live as a retiree. The question is the retirement plan, the inputs to our retirement plan, are they adding up? And from what we see, effectively, the reality is it's not being met. The retirement plan is failing, and our members, if we continue at this trajectory, the reality is that retirement may have to be retired. The traditional family support model is not holding. Probably in the earlier years, you could retire to live with the other extended family, but that is not working. Some members are seeking some alternatives, and we find that there's a higher prevalence of commutation of retirement benefits. And in this instance, some of these amounts are used to start up businesses, which is quite risky. And just in broad strokes, we find that there are severance schemes, there are gratuity schemes, retirement annuities, pension and provident funds. And with these structures, there are governance and management structures, such as a board of trustees. This board of trustees typically would consist of about 5 to a maximum of 11 trustees. And in that context, you find that there's a mix of representation between member trustees and employer trustees and some other independent and risk and compliance officers, which is a nice, good, fantastic mix. It enables representation of each of the stakeholders. Now, duties, amongst others, are of a fiduciary nature, to act impartially, and with that, exercise discretion. Now, typically, this is a duty they owe to the fund and their employers and other relevant stakeholders. So, as a board of trustees, you hold the power of influence. Members' retirement outcomes are a direct reflection of your governance and management decisions, or perhaps lack thereof. And just emphasizing on the aspect I've just touched on in terms of the governance and the management decisions having impact on the members' retirement outcomes. If you look at a typical composure of a board of trustees, which is consider a composition of a typical board of trustees, we have members who represent the employer. We have members who represent the employees. Generally, in terms of employee representation, we have general staff, union representatives, middle management, perhaps in some instances, deferred or pensioner member representatives, and other stakeholder representation. Now, from the perspective of the employer, you would typically have the CEO of the sponsoring employer or managing director, the head of human resource, the CIO, the FDI, and so on. All these are influential positions that are assumed on a board of trustees. And on that context, the epicenter of influence resides within the board of trustees. A lot can be done to influence change that can impact members' retirement outcomes in a positive way. The trustees need to use their power of influence to look at a new way and use this to change and apply the change that is needed for better member retirement outcomes. The ideal objective at retirement is for members to achieve what is referred to as an income replacement ratio. But generally, the idea is that the pot of income that you've been able to build up in your retirement savings should be able to replace your income at retirement at a ratio of about 60 to 75%. So if you're earning an income of 10,000 pula, what you've been contributing towards your retirement fund should be able to replace that income by about 6,000 pula to about 7.5 on an average basis. But the reality is there are some other factors that impact or affect this reality being achieved. These are around about 7 or so of them. These are around contribution, investment returns, costs of fund management, and so on. In this instance, I just look at the sort of impact in the level of contribution that employers are making or stakeholders are making towards their retirement funding. The average is particularly low. You find that employers contribute, in general, around 12 to 15%. There are some certain instances where you have employers and sponsoring employers contributing more. And member contributions will range between 0 to about 8% on the extended few instances. But something can be done. And what is it that we can do differently? There are quite a number of ideas that we could apply. Looking at each of the role players, we could consider from the perspective of the employer, what role can the workplace play in strengthening the well-being of an ecosystem that we're trying to pursue? Organization need to view themselves not only as employers that should pursue goals of transformation, diversity, inclusion, and social cohesion. They can create products and services that respond to social problems and challenges and present more integrated strategic plans. Similarly, financial services and benefit providers, there's an opportunity to develop financial and other products and services that best respond to customer and end user needs. The formal solutions still have a long way to go in addressing the financial needs of the majority. We need to refocus financial savings model from catering only for those who are employed in addressing the needs of the society where a wellspring of indigenous schemes emerged to cater for the economically disadvantaged. We can take lessons from those retirees who've got it right. There are some testimonies, if we actually sink in a dipstick, to appreciate what has been done to get the outcomes right. And on the critical factors affecting employees' financial well-being, we need to relook and review what we're doing and ask the right questions which can make the critical difference. And what we find is that contributions towards employees' retirement savings are low, as earlier mentioned. Employers typically contribute between 12 to about 20% towards their members' retirement funding. And similarly, the employee only contributes about 7%. So as you come in as a board of trustees or as a trustee, don't just come in to manage what you find. There's room for you to look at and try out new ideas. As trustees, remember, you have a power to review and influence change that can better affect or impact members. So in the instance of a gratuity scheme, you find that the model here, the deferred compensation mechanism, is more progressive in its nature. On the first contract, the member will be entitled to a lump sum of 25% of their annual salary. The subsequent second contract, 27.5%, and it continues. So you can see the large disparity between what the employer is doing in a gratuitous scheme in comparison to a retirement fund. There's lots of room for improvement in this instance. If you relook and review, you'll find that the scales are not balanced. We appreciate terms and conditions apply, but these are not cast in stone. Changes need to be made, and these changes can help balance out the scale. But the power to change lies with you as a board of trustees. Remember, in a typical board of trustees, you have your policymakers, legal, you have HR, you have compliance. So you need to look at pulling out the levers to influence and impact change. It's important to try new ideas. After all, you only live once, and you only have one shot to improve that. And how can we improve member retirement outcomes? So as a board of trustees or as a trustees, you need to regularly seek ways to impact positively members' retirement outcomes. Keep it on your radar and integrate this with your principles of good corporate governance. For instance, as you come in onto the board, perhaps it'd be worthwhile to define a set of envisaged strategic outcomes that during your tenure you'd like to achieve. It doesn't need to be a whole huge list, just a couple. For instance, you could look at focusing around member communication and awareness. You could put effort around improving investment outcomes, or perhaps at an operational level, improve the fund's claim management processes. Some retirement funds have members who live on after retirement up to about, in some unfortunate cases, 4 or even 6 months without starting to receive their retirement incomes. And there's an inefficiency opportunity that could be straightened out in those sort of instances. And effectively, this gives you an opportunity to see what sort of impact you're making to your members. So going forward, you can consider building these sort of conditions or automatic provisions into your fund rules. Look at how you can put in and look at creative ways to manage the issues. The proximity of board members may result in increased management expenses. And this is just an illustration amongst many. For instance, if you are a board member, you periodically have to come in to the main headquarters. For instance, it's Gaborone. Their expenditure that as a board, the fund will have to then pay for. These are opportunities that you can extend with the employer. As we've compared, in this particular retirement saving model, the employer's ability or support compares much less in the context of a gratuity scheme. So having said that, we also appreciate that there have been developments in the legislative landscape. And these are all noble. These arise predominantly to protect members' interests. However, there's also a cost side to this conversation. And from the conversation we've just had, essentially these costs are fully funded for at the expense of the member. The regulatory environment is noble in its costs, and it serves to enable for an enriched member retirement experience. It also cultivates opportunities for improved retirement outcomes. However, having said that, if we continue at this trajectory, members are going to miss the target. The majority of our membership will retire poorly. And remember, you are the conductor of the orchestra. So it's your responsibility.